Hey everybody, welcome to today's live Wednesday workshop here inside of LinkedIn. My name is Dranitsaris-Hilliard and I'm an expert in organizational development and behavioral change. And today, in today's topic, we are focusing on the great leadership authority giveaway. Yes, that's right. We see it every day inside of our clients. And the more we've been talking about it with our clients, the more my business partner, Ann, and I have become aware of our own habits, sometimes unconscious habits of giving away our leadership authority or even just our personal authority in different situations as well. And it's an important topic because obviously every time we look at and explore some of these leadership habits or patterns, dysfunctions as we often refer to them as, they have an impact. They have an impact on organizational effectiveness. They have an impact on leadership effectiveness. And when we see leaders giving away their leadership authority, we definitely see a lot of dysfunction that emerges inside of the organization and inside of the teams of these leaders. Now, of course, in these evolving times before us, leaders are encouraged to humanize their leadership, to really bring their whole selves to work. And this is hard to do. It's really hard to do when self-awareness is not that high on the list of developmental activities that leaders gravitate towards, right? So leaders go do a lot of other things to develop themselves functionally in terms of their competence, their technical expertise, but not so much around self-awareness. And so more frequently what we see and what we talk about in our book, So You Think You Can Lead, are those leaders that are trying to be, as we call them, great leaders or good leaders by promoting this image of themselves instead of really working to improve their leadership competencies, whether it's conflict management or team building, communication, whatever the case might be. And it's really sort of funny how leaders can get this idea that they're doing things well without actually checking in to see how their employees are actually experiencing their performance and their behavior as leaders. Our effectiveness as leaders is always the direct result of showing up as humans and using our positional and our personal power to make choices. And those choices are aligned to the priorities of the business and of the people in the business, right? Acting like a leader instead of actually being a leader is really disempowering to the person leading because there's no foundation behind it, right? It's like I'm showing up and I'm trying to be a leader. I'm acting like one based on what I think I should be doing to be a great or a good leader. But on the inside, there isn't that foundation of strength. So there's nothing that the leader has where they've built up or they can be building upon. And so fears get triggered that drive leaders into self-protective behaviors. And it's these self-protective behaviors then that again create the dysfunction inside of the organizations. So when people are leading and they are allowing fear to take in to make them self-protective, it's really disempowering. And that disempowerment can either happen to ourselves and we, disempower ourselves by leaking away our power, or we can disempower the people that we are leading. So it goes into both places. Many leaders we find, and this is, as we've been talking about this notion of leading with authority for the last several years, is many people in leadership roles do not actually know what their role authority involves. In fact, I had a training session with a client just a couple of weeks ago, and that was a big focus of the conversation is what is their authority in their role versus the authority of others, and how do they actually use that role authority to influence, to get to the outcome, to get to the decision that needs to be made, because they were trying to collaborate or they were trying to softly influence, but never stepping into that place of, okay, wait a minute, this is actually my decision to make, and so this is the direction that we need to go in. That lack of understanding of their actual role authority and what it involves, if you think about authority as what we're referring to here is that power to direct the performance and the behavior of our subordinates, the issuing or establishing of expectations, mandates, instructions, even the process of exacting alignment to those stated objectives and expectations from that workforce. While authority is also defined as having the power to set goals, to deliver expectations, exact compliance, it also includes the power to make decisions on behalf of the department, the team, the organization, depending on our actual role. So having this real understanding of our authority and then what the authority is in our role so that we stop giving away that authority. A lot of the times, interestingly enough, in all the years that I've been doing work inside of organizations, we often leave out this piece around authority and don't put it into the role profiles. And so we've relied really heavily on people's ability to assume authority or to understand that authority or their personal authority. And what ends up happening is those that do that a little bit more naturally may actually become overly authoritarian. And again, people will defer to those who are expressive in a more authoritarian manner. So if you think about ESTJs, ENTJs, right? And so when a leader doesn't understand their authority and they think everybody else has authority and they don't have any, again, it's really, really difficult for them to be as effective as we want them to be. And they won't move into that place of making objective decisions, resolving conflict within their roles. Even at the highest level of leadership, we find this where, status and ranking, you would think that they would have that understanding that they have the highest level of leadership authority at this point in time. Again, they don't exercise it from that perspective. And I had a conversation with a CEO client recently where I said, at the end of the day, you're the boss. So it's your call. You hear what they have to say, and then you make the decision. And so when people don't even understand how to use their personal authority in these situations, they defer to others, or they defer to the collective, or they just kick the decision or the resolution of the issue down the road, which we also see. So what we're talking about here today, that great power giveaway at the leadership level, is about permissive leadership. And we've done a few sessions about permissive leadership and the dysfunction around it. So this is kind of tackling this one specific aspect of how those that are working from that permissive leadership persona give their power away. This leadership style is on the rise. It's so prevalent in organizations, and that's why it's really important to understand. And we see this in clients where, it's like, can I say something about this? I'm not in agreement. Do I say it or do I just let it go? Or I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I want to give them every opportunity. It's like all these stories that get told, very self-protective. And again, in each one of those moments, we're giving our leadership power away. And people have a fundamental fear of using their role and their personal authority in the workplace. And I think a few years ago, before we even launched our book, we were doing a series about authority, today's dirty word, because it's fallen out of favor, because people attach authority with the autocratic leadership style. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about exercising an appropriate amount of authority and being able to make the call. It happens in a personal context. And interestingly enough, I caught myself the other day. We're in the process of doing some renovations around our house, and our contractor, even though I had said exactly how I wanted something done, when it came time to do it, came back to me and said, you don't want it done like that. You want it done like this. This is going to look so much better. You need to have it done this way. And I said, no, my preference is the other way. And he just kept at it. He's like, no, this is going to be so much better. And so finally, I gave away my power and I said, fine, just do it, because I just wanted it done. And then as soon as I saw what he'd done, it was like, it looked exactly wrong, which is what I was worried about and why I wanted it done a different way. But that was my responsibility. In that moment, I gave up my power, right? I allowed him, I deferred to his decision as opposed to asserting my authority as the homeowner and ultimately the client as being the one who got to make the decision on this. And so again, we do it here, we do it there. Sometimes we do it at the hairdresser, we do it with our children, our in-laws, but we do it in the organizational context as well. When we're sitting in a meeting and we're not saying what it is that we're thinking, we're not stating a concern or raising or escalating something, we're giving our power away. And really being able to identify this dysfunction in your organizations is really important in starting to make that shift and that transition in order to make sure that everyone, especially on a team and on a leadership team, where we have people equally exercising their authority and not deferring it or giving it away or acting it out in other places, okay? Leaders, bottom line, should not be giving away their leadership power, and they really need to learn to lead authentically and with authority in order to be ultimately effective. So I want to talk about the 5 more frequent ways that we see leaders leaking or giving away power as leaders and managers. And so just see if you identify with any of these. They are automatic, disempowering behaviors. And that's what you want to start to catch them as and catch yourself in it is, am I giving away my power here? Why am I disempowering myself? Because this is, at the end of the day, bottom line for us as leaders, we have to catch ourselves and be aware of when we're disempowering ourselves so we can shift back into leading, owning our authority, and being ultimately effective. Okay? So here's one of the most common ways that we see this being acted out in organizations all the time. And what happens in the first example is leaders silence themselves, right? For fear of that the employees or their peers or someone else in the organization is going to take things the wrong way or judge you for it. And so, of course, anyone can misunderstand, right? If they're listening through the lens of subjectivity or through a defensive story about how everyone is always mean to them, because you never know what's going on in people's heads. And at the end of the day, employees can be defensive and predisposed to accusing leaders of bullying them these days, micromanaging them. Is this new? It used to be micromanaging. Now we hear a lot more than being accused of bullying because they're trying to manage performance. But it doesn't mean that you as a leader are off the hook and shouldn't say anything. Right? So not saying anything for fear of what others might think or might say gives them the power to control the narrative. Right? You basically handed over to them and said, I'm not going to say anything here and you get to figure it out. My client was giving me an example where they were she was trying to escalate an issue within her organization and her peers weren't saying anything and really leaving her sort of out there to be the spokesperson on all of their behalf. So in each of their cases, they were giving away their power, but what it did was it made the issue be about her as opposed to what the actual issue was. And so this is that thing of they sat back because they could see that the CEO is getting upset by this conversation, and so they didn't want to weigh in on it. And this is what happens all that time where we're giving away our power and we're not, again, contributing to or controlling that narrative that's going on. Another common thing that we see where we've got leaders giving away their power is that they give into emotional manipulation and blame others for manipulating them. So if you're like most leaders today, you know how easy it is to give away your power, especially to narcissistic coworkers and to narcissistic employees, because they are leaders and there's also narcissistic employees that we're working with. And you can be manipulated by employees who are entitled, including those who don't meet performance expectations and threaten to quit if they're not promoted. You can also let yourselves be devalued in meetings by peers, or especially if you don't correct them when they claim ownership over an idea or a project because you're worried that you're going to look petty or that you're somehow going to upset them. So again, in this second one is that giving into that emotional manipulation of others and ultimately blaming others for manipulating them, as opposed to, again, holding my power. And I had a conversation with a group recently, and they were talking about this devaluation piece where they're in meetings and they start to feel devalued, and how do you handle that? And you certainly don't move into defend mode, and you also don't want to go silent on it. And so how do you step into your authority in that particular situation? So we talked about the importance of, it's what's the redirect around it. And it's like, okay, we're not going to go there, don't devalue me in this moment. It's like, let's focus on the issue. Let's redirect the conversation back. But if you allow that devaluation to happen, again, you're giving your power away, and you leave that meeting, again, feeling like you've been manipulated or feeling like they've made it about you, right? One of the other ways that leaders can disempower themselves, give away their power, is by not delegating, which is an interesting thought, right? But because you would think, well, if I'm not delegating, I'm holding on to my power. But in fact, it's the flip. The belief that you have, if you hold the belief that if you delegate, you're not going to get the results that you want, or that it's just faster to do things on your own, it causes you to always have too much on your plate. And that's disempowering, right? You tell yourself that you're too busy to teach anyone, but the reality is, in this case, again, when we're dealing with the permissive leadership dysfunction, it's they're having so much to do, gives us this sense of power and control, and it makes it hard to give up. Right? But we disempower ourselves because we keep ourselves so busy that we can't actually lead. We can't actually build up. We can't actually build our team. And delegating can feel like you're giving power away, but in fact, it's the opposite, right? And so that's the thing, is that you're staying in it. You still hold the authority around it. You still hold the decision making, but you're delegating off the work in order to be able to actually increase your power and increase your authority in that situation. one of the ways in which leaders give away their power, the fourth example I'm going to talk about, is complaining. So I joke about this sometimes, say it's the all-time Canadian pastime is we like to complain. But leaders who are disempowering themselves, giving away their power, is they spend a lot of time complaining, right? Complaining about their employees, complaining about how busy they are, complaining about how no one helps you, or how incompetent, or how others just don't understand. Whatever it is that you're caught up in that story that generates the complaining, it is a way of, again, making yourself feel powerful because you're pointing out what everybody else is doing wrong, or the circumstances. But every time we complain, it's almost like we're saying to ourselves, and we're so powerless that we can't do anything about it, right? So it's like, my employee won't perform and I can't do anything about my employee never gets it, they always get everything wrong. And so the focus is always on them and them being wrong or them being in the bad spot, that we don't actually take it back to us and say, where am I exercising my power and authority here to get the employee to the level of performance that I require? And in all seriousness, we have clients that have complained about the same thing, and then the same employee in some cases, for years and years and years, and inside of their organization. And whenever we ask them, okay, so what do you want to do about it to resolve it? It's like, oh, well, there's nothing that can be done. That's just the way they are. Again, going into this, complaining as though I'm powerless in my role as the leader to do anything about it. But if you as the leader can't do anything about it, then how are you expecting the employees ever going to make that transition? We have to remind ourselves that no matter kind of what our frustration might be, it is up to us, right? We have the power, we have the authority. It is actually up to us to get our team to perform, to get our employees to behave differently, to resolve the issues that are causing frustration. No one out there is going to rescue us from ourselves, right? Because that's fundamentally what complaining is that we're stuck in our own story here, that we're looking for someone to come along and rescue us. But this is ours. This is our job. This is our authority, our responsibility, right? So it is up to us to do something about it. And if you decide not to, if you decide that I'm not going to do anything about it for whatever reason because I don't think there's anything that can be done, and then stop complaining about it. Right? Stop complaining about yourself, stop complaining about your circumstances, because again, it's the act of complaining and putting it out there that is sending the message to everyone that you're powerless and you can't actually do anything in your role. Think about whether you are offended if someone offers to help because of the idea that someone thinks you can't handle it all, right? Because people will complain, and then when someone offers them help, then they get offended by it. And again, it's that power dynamic that we're exploring here, and how easy it is for leaders with that permissive persona to go into these places and into these patterns of behavior where they're just giving their power away here and there and everywhere, to the point of rendering them, ineffective in essence in their roles. The last one I want to talk about is that leaders do, where they're giving away their power, is they don't hold their boundaries, but get angry at others for crossing them. And this is a really interesting one. So it's that, saying yes to employee. I mean, here's a really good example. You say yes to an employee's request for time off, and then you have to stay late in order to get the work done because there's no one else to do it. And then you resent the employee, or you get angry because you're ending up working past your boundaries because you said yes to someone else, right? So it's like this pattern that we get into, all with that notion of, well, I want to be seen as a good or a great leader, and so I'm going to be permissive and I'm going to say yes, and then I'm going to feel like that power has been taken away from me and there's nothing I can do to resolve it, right? And it's that we know we get into that place with the permissive persona of really worrying about and being afraid of disappointing our employees, or that they might quit if we don't say yes, all these scary stories we tell ourselves, right? And so we end up saying yes to people that ask for more than you should give, and not being really able to look at it effectively. Or maybe what it is that you're being really permissive with employees in the hopes that they're going to admire or appreciate or think more highly of you for doing it. So this is one where, being able to understand your boundaries and when an employee has crossed that boundary for you. I have a client of mine where they will go back to that same employee over and over and over again to try and get the employee to do something. And every time the employee says, no, I haven't gotten to it. No, I haven't started it yet. No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get it done. And then they don't get it done. That's crossing a boundary, right? So my boundary is I set the expectation, I set the timeline. If you don't do it, that's crossing my boundary. It's my job to hold you to account for it. But with the permissive persona, when we give the power away, we say, oh, okay, well, when are you going to have it to me, right? As though they are the ones getting to make the decision. Right? Or an employee in a session recently said, well, my manager's always giving me stuff and, asking me to work all of these kinds of hours. And, how do I manage that boundary so I don't feel like I'm being disempowered? And when we actually went to talk to the manager said, well, at any point in time, this employee can say, well, my boundary is like, because of these other things I have, or I've got these personal commitments, and to negotiate it. But because they are not having that conversation around that as to what are you empowered to do versus what am I empowered to do as your manager, we create these circumstances where the employee is feeling like they're being victimized, right? And they're complaining about their manager, and the manager has absolutely no awareness that this situation is going on. So this is, again, as I said, the focus of this is mostly about how leaders give away their power, but we do it also as employees, as parents, as family members, and as customers. We will give our power away if we're not conscious of this notion of what is my personal authority here, how am I exercising my power, and am I giving my power away in this situation, and do I mean to, right? So if we're going to give our power away, let's be really intentional about it, as opposed to doing it out of habit or to be seen as a good or a great leader, as we talk about with this particular persona. So what do we do? At the end of the day, bottom line with this is, first things first is starting to really become aware of where are you giving away your power, right? Where you, as we say, the great leadership power handover, right? Or handout, where are you giving your power away? And what are those micro places? What are those macro places? It's who is it with? What are the circumstances in which it typically happens? And starting to build that self-awareness, because like everything we say, it takes time and practice to really develop and tolerate authentic power. Think of it like a mental muscle that needs to be flexed, and if you haven't been flexing it, it's not going to be very strong. And so at first it's going to feel really uncomfortable when you go to exercise that power, and then but the more you do it, the stronger that mental muscle is going to get. Putting yourself in the driver's seat of your leadership role by deciding, how it is that you want to lead, how you want the team and the employees to perform. I was working with a client a couple of weeks ago, and we've been, really helping to kind of upskill some of the members of their team. And the conversation that we had was around exactly this, right? What are the rules for how you're leading the team? What's non-negotiable for your team? Because they have these conversations and they don't get what they want, because a conversation isn't necessarily exercising your power, because a conversation implies, again, in the way they're doing it, is, what do you think? Would it be possible? That's giving our power away, even in that language choice in that moment, right? So what is it that we want? How do we want the team and the employees to perform? What do we want to delegate? What are our expectations to delegate? How do we make sure that we've got time to develop ourselves, not only our people, and again, that expression of our unique abilities, because we're working on developing our authentic selves as leaders, and that requires us to build up that foundation underneath that. Developing yourself as a leader who has authority, again, it takes time, reflection, feedback, and practice. We always recommend for all of our clients, hands down, start with an understanding of your leadership style. Using a psychometric assessment such as ours, the Striving Styles Personality System, or the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, really helps you to understand the habits of your mind and those natural behavioral preferences, including those self-protective patterns of behavior that you're going to be able to start to now watch for, name, and self-correct, right? It really does serve as the basis for all of our development plans. We start from where we are at and where we want to move towards. Setting expectations and holding people accountable consistently in a disciplined way. This is really important as a first step or a next step after you learn about your leadership style, in order to really stop giving your power away. Setting those expectations, as I said, my other client, we're talking about having a bunch of team rules that they can use to hold people accountable to, setting expectations, metrics, however you want to define it. we know from our own experience, but also the research backs this up, that most executives are missing the mark on this key element of holding our power as leaders, right? Now, of course, feedback's an essential aspect to this process. Giving feedback, not withholding information for fear of, how the employee is going to react, or the fact that they're not going to see us as a good or great leader. Again, this is, we want to give feedback. That's part of us exercising our power and authority and making sure that there's the alignment, right, to those expectations that we've established. Delegation, I talked about that earlier. And of course, speaking up and using non-defensive communication skills. So speaking up without getting angry, depersonalizing the situation, again, holding our power and not giving our power away or disempowering ourselves by not speaking up, right? These are the pieces. Holding our power requires us always to stay calm and focused without getting caught up in convincing the other person or convincing the other person that you're not a bad person for having said this or done this, right? It's simply saying, I had the right in this, I'm exercising my authority. I want something done. I want something done in a particular way. I'm giving you this feedback, or I disagree with what you're saying. I'd like us to find a better solution. All of those are places where we have the opportunity in the moment to make sure we don't give our power away. Okay, so leave you with all of that self-assessment, starting with a really good understanding of your leadership style. Where are you developing from? Where are you growing from? And setting expectations, including setting expectations for yourself. If you have a manager who gives his power away or her power away and has never set expectations, set them for yourself. Don't wait for them. This is your ability to empower, your opportunity, to empower yourself by working to say, if I were in my boss's role, what would be the expectations I would be establishing for somebody in my role? And start working towards those, and then consider those and work it down to the folks underneath you. If you're looking for more information about the permissive leadership style, about leaking power, disempowering, check out our YouTube videos, Dranitsaris-Hilliard. Tons of great content on leadership, on organization, and on personal development, including we've loaded a ton of recent videos that have to do with the relationship styles of each of the different Myers-Briggs or striving styles types. So that's some really great content there for yourselves and for people that you're in relationships with, either at work or personally. Don't forget, we've got our podcast series. We drop a new podcast every Tuesday, all about dismantling dysfunction in organizations. This week's topic was, I believe, actually about permissiveness. Next week, we're talking about silos, the dysfunction of silos. So check that out. Go in, subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And always encourage you, if you want to learn more about leading with authority and about the permissive leadership dysfunction, check out our book, So You Think You Can Lead. Until next time, thanks everyone for joining me, and look forward to hearing your comments and your feedback.